I consider Stranger Things Season 1 to be a perfect season of television, quite literally without any flaws. And while Season 4 is certainly not that, I have trouble claiming that this new season isn't more meaningful. Every outing of Stranger Things has been about something specific, but I believe it is Season 4 where this focus is soaked into every crevice of the episodes, affecting every character in some unique way. Stranger Things has never been more about anything in its entire multi-year run. And while I can't say this season is my favorite of the bunch, I can pretty safely agree that I got the most out of it. Trauma. Today we are going to be talking about trauma. But before I do that, I first want to give a spoiler warning for the entirety of Season 4. And more importantly, a trigger warning for everything shown on the screen right now. Alright, now let's get into this. After the first 3 episodes, I really didn't understand what all the hype for this new season was about. I mean, thus far, I thought it was the worst one, and while still great as always, of course, it was pretty lacking in some key areas. And then episode 4 hit, and my god, I have never had an opinion change so fast in my life. We all know about that scene, and oh boy, we'll be getting to that soon. But I want to explain what made it so great to begin with. Build up. Max has always been a stoic character, even as far back as her introduction in Season 2. She certainly has never had the best home life, and her social life is presumably not much better. So it's not hard to see why she would instinctively shut others out, especially if she found them to be a bit annoying. But as we all know, she warmed up to the group, and little by little we watched as she opened herself up more. Every episode brought more of her character to life, as she fortified her negative emotions at home with positive ones with the gang. And then Billy dies, and that changes everything. To say this simply made Max sad would be entirely missing the point. At least that's what I think. No, instead, she's confused. There never really was a moment of genuine connection between the two. We never got to see Billy and Max ever bond. But he still saves her. He saves her, and he probably saves the entire world. And then he's gone. She can't talk to him about what just happened. She can't ask him why he did it, how he actually felt about her. Instead, she's met with a cold silence. He is no longer there to speak with. It isn't about what was lost. Rather, it was what could have been. Something that is impossible now. And not only this, but Max wonders if she could have saved him, if she could have just pulled him away. She feels guilty for having just stood there, even if moving feels like such an impossible thing to do. But Billy did. Why? Why did Billy move? Why did he save Elle and save Max? She'll never be able to know. She'll never be able to escape this guilt, this pain that comes from not knowing, from not doing anything. Or at least that's what she thinks. Trauma is tricky. Everyone experiences it so vastly different from others. It can find a way to creep into every little thing you do, every little thought that you have. It will do this without you ever realizing. You'll feel pain that you can't explain, an emptiness that can infect your entire life, and yet you may not even know the direct cause. But perhaps worst of all, it can make you feel like the bad guy, the villain. This is your fault. You did this. You're the one who didn't move. You could have saved him, Max. God, this scene. It absolutely killed me. You have such a deeply emotional outpouring from Max, a girl who doesn't often let herself have those. A sacred moment of her allowing herself to feel all of those emotions. And then it gets crushed, just like that. Sometimes with trauma, no moment is safe. In the blink of an eye, it can all flood back, completely and utterly possessing you, until you can't possibly think of anything else, even during such a vulnerable moment. And then it twists your words, your feelings, into something so cruel. You're glad he's dead. No, actually, you're happy he's dead, Max. You wanted him to die. It's okay to admit it. You don't feel guilty because you didn't do anything. You feel guilty because you didn't want to do anything. Isn't that right? This is what VECNA is. Trauma. Something you can only really describe as a demon. He is this pain and suffering given form. A truly horrifying monster. This scene even reveals how Max often feels when it's the most quiet. Sometimes she doesn't want to be alive anymore, and that's heartbreaking. All her seclusion, blocking out her friends and the vibrant life around her with her headphones, this is all because of this trauma. Not just from Billy's death, but also from his life. What he put her through, what her parents put her through, the likely domestic abuse she had to bear witness to and possibly even endure after Billy was gone. It was all of these things that created VECNA. Not the one we see on screen, but rather what he represents. And then he says perhaps the most damning line of them all.
You belong here with me.
That one. That's the one that broke me. The one that reveals perhaps how she feels about herself. About a situation that was in no way her fault. She's the monster. Not only was she happy about Billy's death, no, she doesn't even belong with her friends. She doesn't deserve to talk with them, or to laugh with them, or even to cry with them. She's sick, diseased. There's something wrong with her. She's incurable. She doesn't even belong with them. She belongs here, in this hell, because she is a monster. This is often how trauma makes us feel. Perhaps it's our brain trying to somehow rationalize this horrible situation. Or maybe it's something else entirely. I don't know. But what matters is how isolating it is. Always feeling as if you shouldn't be here. That a monster like you doesn't deserve these people. It's horrible. And you want to imagine that this feeling is just imaginary. I mean, the Upside Down is such a bizarre place, and VECNA is literally using all these weird psychic powers, so it can probably all just be an illusion, right? It must be. Surely there must be some hope in this impossible situation. And Max says as much. She exclaims to VECNA that he isn't actually there at all.
I am Max. I am.
There is no easy answer for trauma. Honestly, I'm not sure if there's an answer at all, but it is real. It is here. It can't be written off as some illusion. It's horrible. It's crippling. It's isolating. It can be the worst feeling on the planet. But even worse so is that it's so real that it can almost touch you. It will affect you. It can even cause you to do things you otherwise wouldn't. So then what do we do? What can we possibly do? Well, Stranger Things doesn't give us the answer, but it gives us an answer. We acknowledge, we confront, we trust in others, and even after all of the pain, we try to heal. After all, despite everything.
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Max is the most obvious example of how the show analyzes trauma, but VECNA has many more victims. The entire point of his character is to be a vehicle to explore this concept, as his entire gimmick is literally to kill off people that have experienced some kind of significant trauma in their lives. Of course, we're not exactly sure why he does this as of yet, but there's certainly a pattern here. Even Elle, who doesn't directly encounter VECNA as we see him in the present day, has experienced significant trauma with the person he used to be. Trauma so bad that she almost certainly suffers from dissociative amnesia, a condition commonly associated with PTSD that leaves a person with a fractured or entirely missing recollection of a particularly traumatic event, or series of events. This disconnect often also leaves the person to suffer from disassociation. Perhaps they somewhat remember the event, but they don't register it as happening to them, instead viewing it from an almost third-person perspective. If you're a fan of the channel, you'll probably recognize this condition from our favorite steak-eating dreamer. But for the rest of you, just know this is a very debilitating mental illness. This actually explains why this plot point was never once mentioned before this season, or probably even thought of by the writers. Elle just didn't remember it. We see that she does have some recollection, but not only is it incredibly spotty and probably only remembered because she was led to the memory, but it's also incredibly misleading. It makes it seem like she killed all of those children, something that she undoubtedly believes at this point in her character arc, even though we obviously know that she didn't. She did make the indirect decision to grant one his powers back, however, so that guilt likely helped to manifest her amnesia. The fact that the most plot-significant branch in this season's story is literally Elle trying to remember and face her past trauma with the blatantly on-the-nose method of being in a machine that does nothing but serve that purpose should be a clear indicator that this is what Stranger Things is trying to explore this season. And while Elle's story arc has been incredible to watch, we don't really have enough to work with in order to properly talk about it beyond this point. That will have to wait until Volume 2 comes out, and perhaps a follow-up video on the topic. But I do want to focus on one more character before we wrap up here, and specifically on a monologue that is perhaps the best the entire series has had to offer. So let's take a look at our coffee and contemplation-loving police chief, Hopper. When Hopper had more or less given up on life, I had to know why. I mean, this was Hopper we're talking about here. And then he mentions turning 18, mentions Uncle Sam and the war in the jungle. And at that moment, my eyes were glued to the screen. War trauma is perhaps the most represented form of trauma in media, and yet also the least understood. You can't truly feel the lives taken, that unbearable weight on your shoulders, unless you're the one who took them. It's impossible. Hopper was indirectly forced and at the time blindly but agreeably participated in the killing of countless men, women, and children. He didn't know, but that trauma is going to stay with him. He's gonna carry that weight. Everything that happens after is metaphorical. The destruction of his relationships gradually following after the destruction of himself, with his trauma being the Agent Orange, poisoning everything and everyone around him. They tried to return to normalcy, but they just couldn't. They couldn't. It clung to them. That horror, it refused to let go. It poisoned everything and everyone they loved. Everything that happens after is also literal. The effects of the agent are real, and Hopper has to be reminded of that over and over. The trauma that he endures not just in Vietnam, but everything after. From losing his daughter, to his wife leaving, to everything we see in the show. Having Joyce come to Russia, not being able to be there for Elle. He puts all this weight on his shoulders, and he decides that he's the problem. He isn't cursed. He is the curse. This is sadly a natural reaction to a lot of trauma, especially if it's true that we did have some part to play in bad things happening. What makes it so hard is that you can't say definitively that it's not your fault. You can't separate your own broken perception from reality, so you can't determine where or when things went wrong. Perhaps it is your fault. Perhaps it's not. In cases like Hopper, this dichotomy, this inability to easily place blame, makes it an impossible situation. He can't say for sure that he isn't cursed, even though we as onlookers can so clearly see that he's not the problem. He's made some mistakes along the way, sure, but he's a good person. He didn't cause this, but he doesn't know that. Stranger Things Season 4 has brought with it an even more laser-focused theme than previous seasons. It seeks to explore trauma and the ways that it can manifest and take hold of us. What it can make us think, how it can make us feel, how it can ultimately be the end of us. Of course, this season isn't over. We have yet to see the conclusion to these stories, if such a thing as closure is even really possible in these situations. And I'm excited for those last 2 episodes. Especially since the last one is like 2 hours long, I'm pretty sure. Something like that. Jesus. But until then, all we can do is wait. And hey, while you're waiting, why don't you consider subscribing to the channel? I'm currently working on a horror short film, so uploads will be a bit slower than usual for the time being, but I know you won't want to miss that and everything else. And if you want to hear about a horror game that deals with very similar themes of trauma, I'd highly recommend this video here. And, as always, thank you for watching.